What's going on, guys? Welcome into today's show. We've got Katie Kim. This was a fun one. Katie is just full of energy, fast talking, knows her shit, and she's one of those individuals that their energy is just infectious. So I know that you're going to get a lot of value out of today's episode. We dug into all things development. She comes from a family business that played in the construction and development industry. She got her start in the real estate industry and then started transitioning over full time into construction and development and deal making. And she's brilliant. She knows her stuff, and she went over a lot of things today that anybody who is looking to build wealth in real estate, whether you want to develop or not, were extremely valuable. Creative financing, deal structuring, all the different stages and steps, timelines, costs that go into development, the ways of bringing deals together, partnering. There were so many different cool topics that we were able to dive in on: tax incentives, grant programs, ways that are really value add information that can help you make a lot of money if this is a path or a vehicle that you want to go down yourself, or if you're just thinking about investing passively in, development deals or syndication deals. Some great things to think about to help you feel a little bit more confident and, sharp when it goes into making big investments in the real estate space. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Be sure to check out the show notes with all the links, all the great resources that she's got available for you. And let's dig in today with Katie Kim. Welcome in, Miss Katie Kim.
Thank you. Welcome.
I was joking around like, man, I got to make sure I ask her last name. I always ask, my guest's last name to make sure I'm not screwing that one up. But, Kim's a tough one to mess up. But I want to say thank you for joining us today. And, your topic and your area of expertise is one that I think a lot of people aspire to get into, to build wealth. I know when I first got into real estate, I always knew there were really two, I guess, I always look at real estate as like at least the journey of real estate as like a totem pole. And like,
yes,
top of the totem pole to me was always like interchangeable commercial real estate investors and developers, right? Like
yes.
The people who own the big buildings in throughout the cities, or the people that were building them, were always just very intriguing to me, because it, for a lot of people, feels very intimidating and daunting and, complicated. And so I'm curious on, one, how did you get into real estate? What led you into the space? And how did you, make development a full-time focus, and now what it's turned into you as a massive career in business?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I grew up in a construction real estate development family, which basically means I was a victim of child labor law, right? Like I'd go to soccer practice and then I'd get to build walls, or I'd go to volleyball and I'd be shingling a roof. It didn't really mean that I learned the tricks, right? Like people are always like, oh, you must have learned. Like, no. And people say like, oh, you were doing fix and flip. I'm like, I was doing fix and flip before it was called fix and flip, right? Like that was Saturday afternoon. I mean, that's pretty much what it was. So I, like any kid of a family-owned business, go say, I'm going to go away to college. I'm never owning the family business. I'm going away. And I did. I went to work for a big consulting firm and got to play in all the tech stuff and a startup. And then I was like, that got bought out. And I'm like, I want to do something impactful, right? I mean, like we get, I think, to the point where your 20s, you're learning, right? Like absorb any kind of experience you can. Your 30s, you're like, what am I starting to get passionate about, right? And let me lean into that. I had, of course, because you can't let it leave your blood when you're in real estate development. So as soon as I graduated college, when I moved to Chicago, I bought my first condo. And then I just kind of, when I say I just kind of bought one every single year, like I did, because I was single. I was dating now my husband. So, I mean, I didn't really have any expenses, to be honest. So I would just put it all to real estate. And then my mom was like, well, do you want to make this the next level? And I was like, yeah, like I want to learn how to do the development deals. So I went back home, ran the family construction company for 10, 12 years. And then I got to the point where I realized the passion that I had was for helping people put the deals together, and not so much for managing that day-to-day of the construction. And then when I started to become a student of the game of like, how did you put that deal together? How did you put this deal together? Like, what's the formal education, right? So my nerd brain, because I do have a master's in computer science, so I'm pretty nerdy. Like, goes to those if then else statements. Well, if I have this property, then I can do this stuff, or else I can do this. And I work through like capital stacks that way. So I started really going into projects with somebody telling me I can't, which is like the surest way to get some shit done. You might need to bleep that out, but
not on this show.
Okay, perfect. So the surest way to get something done is, to tell me I can't. And so there, even my mom was like, well, you can't go into a no money in deal. Like those are like from the 90s and 80s, Katie. Like, I'm like, yes, let's do this. Right. So I literally, I was working with Subway at the time and they wanted like 4 or 5 different locations throughout the area. And so to me, like, when you were talking about single family rental going into commercial, there's different risks within the different product types. Right. And so I looked at like, how do my risk mitigation strategy, which a lot of people don't think about when they started going into different product mixes. But I said, okay, I want multi-tenant. So now if one tenant leaves, I'm not paying the whole thing, right? I want 50% to cover my mortgage and let's go. And so I went in and I was going to go a contract for deed with this guy for land right across from a college, going to do a small little strip center. Subway was going in. So like, as you've mentioned before, I got the income, I got the tenant in pocket, right? And I actually had I was going to put my real estate office in there, which I've learned is now a blessing and occupational hazard because we've moved our office like 6 times. Now it's the joke of like, are we going in this office for real? Like, are we really moving in? Maybe. And so we built the building and I had an investor come in that says, I want a piece of the deal, and said, okay. And I structured it kind of on the fly, really. And we went into it. I didn't put any money down and it was cash flowing. We recently just sold it for profit. But after I did that one, I was like, okay, that's it, right? Like, that's the process. Let's go. And then I got introduced to economic incentives. And so when I launched the Kim Group, more than our real estate, because we had been doing real estate, like I said, on the side, just kind of buying our own stuff. Mm-hmm. I launched a developer for fee service. So where we help small business owners or business owners, small aspiring developers, figure out the process, figure out how to do it, hold them through the steps. And, sometimes we do the steps for them too, like whatever they need, we plug and play. And, my first project out of the gate was a project called Trefsker's Bakery. And it's a amazing bakery, family owned since 1861. Wow. And they had rented the entire time, like 1861. Like, you've bought your building like 20 times over, right? And so they said, well, we're bakers, Katie. Like, that's what we know how to do. And I was brought in to pull them into another development. And I said, this doesn't fit what you want, which is I'm no holds bar. Like, I'm going to tell you like it is. So, and the mayor, I thought at that time was going to jump across the table and be like, Katie, we brought you in to get them in here. I'm like, no, there's still space in your city. We'll find it. And so, it's actually this building that's in my background here. It was a 1893-year-old bicycle factory. Like, it was before the town was there. It was painted over, boarded up, like eyesore to the community type of institution. And I said, this is it. You're gonna think I'm smoking crack. Like, you totally are gonna think that. And I go, we didn't know it was for sale. And so we walk through it and they're like, this is it. And I was like, you're my people. You see it. But then you go to the finances, right? And they don't have a lot of money. They're bakers. They're, reconstruction of an old building usually takes at least two to three times the cost a regular one would of ground up new construction. So how do we now get you 3.5 times the space for 2.5 times the price tag for 1.5 times the cost? And so then I went to my nerd brain and kind of went through all the financial structures, and that's exactly what we did. So we went to the village and we said, we need you to do a TIF district. We need to create a business development district. We need to create a special service area. And then we got historic tax credits in. So we had 7, I think now I said 8 financial sources in this project. But we were able to do a $5 million project with only $1.8 million of bank debt on the project.
Wow.
And our investors, where we only raised $460,000, got 353% return in 4 years that were mostly through tax credits and tax incentives. So it was not taxable as that income as well. So it was like a double down return. And I got hooked. And that's how I just like, this is my jam. This is what I want to do. And the bakery was able to grow into a space 3.5 times the cost, or 3.5 times the space for 1.5 times the cost. And then also through leveraging some green technology, we reduced the original utility bill in half. So from the original space, it went down to half, even for 3.5 times the cost or the space. So I love it because it just kind of helped me like, what else can we do? What else can we play with? And then realizing that people make development so complex, and it can be, but there's like this underlying linear path, and then you kind of niche out and you can play out. And there's so many opportunities where people are leaving money on the table. And that honestly pisses me off because we don't do as a community, as a government, good job teaching our small business owners and our developers about these incentives and how to use them. A lot of times they're just for the big boys that are doing the big shopping centers and the big developments. And so, but once you know the game, it's like, it's more fun. I think like if you think development's fun, if you think commercial real estate's fun, you start putting in some like economic incentives and like tax risks and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes it real fun.
Oh, because like this investment, it wasn't sexy. And I actually had to, it wasn't sexy at first, I should say, because we were guaranteeing, right? And we don't like to guarantee as developers. We don't ever like to guarantee a 4.8% interest like return. And it was guaranteed and it would compound, but then it was double the depreciation allocation, double the interest rate of allocation, double the historic tax credits. And it was all those different incentives. And we had a guaranteed buyout price in 5 years. That is what made that 353% return for them. And so when we started talking with investors, they're like, Katie, we want to invest in the bakery. We understand that this is a tax benefit. Show us why we should invest, right? Show us what this really means for us, because we want to make more money, right? But we want to have Uncle Sam take less. Like that was the question. And to me, like, how do we keep more of our money? Our investors were asking. And so that was where we were really able to get creative and structure this deal to fill that need. And I went to my CPA and did a side-by-side comparison. I said, I just got to do the math. Again, nerd, right? So if I do a 10% return in the stock market over 5 years, what does that look like, right? And if I do this development, what does it look like? And so he goes, yep. He goes, at a defined assumed tax rate for our investors and this, everything else held equal. Yeah, this is right. And it was that one sheet that literally filled our raise within a week on this project.
Wow.
And we had some investors come back, like on Monday, they committed. Thursday, they said, I want to put another 50 in. Like, can I put another 50? Do we still have it? And it was something I'm like, why don't we do this more often? Like this one sheet of, this is what it is. Yeah.
So I definitely want to dive into that. I want to back up a little bit to talking a little bit so people understand fee development.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Right? And how does that apply to the average investor or business owner that may want to utilize those services or step into providing that service?
So development for fee?
Yep.
Yeah. So how I do is I start with like, what do you need? Who's on your team? What do you want to do? So I kind of start way from the beginning and assume that like you've never done anything.
Yep.
You're green bean. And I go really rudimentary and look at your time, talent, and treasure triangle. And so that's where I know when you're in alignment, because we only have a certain amount of time. We only have a certain amount of treasure, money that we can invest. And we only have a certain amount of talent. Like, what do you know? What do you don't, what do you not know? What can we help teach you? And what do you want to learn in the journey? So like, if you're saying, hey, Katie, I want to start my own development company. Like that was one of our clients. I said, okay, so what do you want to do in these steps of the process? And I really want to learn how to sell. I really want to learn how to pitch. Okay. So we were the ones that helped like design the layout of the buildings, what uses would be in there. We referenced like tapestry reports and what's going to really be financially stable in this community and the environment, everything. And said, these are the uses. We already have some some interest and flow. Let's start marketing some of these spaces. So in that project for the aspiring developer who now he's launched his own development company. He's done so many deals, like so proud, right? Like a little proud mama, like, yes, you got it. You don't need me. I mean, that's my satisfaction is making sure I teach you. So like we walk on the first one, maybe we run on the second, and then you're like, you leave the nest. You know what I mean? Like you go do what you want to do. Or we still plug and play, or we still invest in your projects. That's always too something we entertain. So then he was like, I want to be able to do the construction on the project. I'm like, done. Okay, this is what I need from you in cost. So we did the initial analysis. We did the initial needs assessment. We did a market analysis. We did the pitch deck for him. We did the architectural schematic layout. I say that because then you bring the architect in to do all the details, but like schematically, want to know, like, is it going to fit? Is it going to lay out? Is it going to work? Yep. And then because that was another victim of childhood. I had to take a drafting class in high school so I could learn. And so I looked at that, and then we did the pitch deck. He did the initial pitches. So he would go out and we tracked it. So we have a lead generation tracker, right? You have an investor tracker and which stages you're in. So we would do, one investor calls me the adult supervision on that. Like, you're the adult supervision. You kept all the paperwork, right? And then, but he would pitch it, and then he would come sit with us through the final pitch, right? Like when we're talking them through, we step in to our investors with a letter of commitment, and then go to like our PPM documents and our subscription agreements and stuff like that.
Yep.
But we step into that process with them. So he would be there for that final pitch, and then we would handle it through paper close, and then we bring them into the development experience. So we do a lot of urban infill. We've done ground up as well, but like a lot of the process, we take them through construction. We're doing, newsletter updates, photos. We do walkthroughs with them. We have investor happy hours where we take them through the construction site. We really engage them as much as they want. And then we leased up the property. We managed it from an asset side until we taught his team how to manage it themselves. And like now he has an asset management company too, along with his development company. So yeah. And
it's good to hear that, right? Because I think a lot of people think from a development standpoint, you have to know every aspect of development. And that was one of my biggest things where I was like, man, I like all of these things that you just listed, just a fraction of the stuff that goes into a development.
Yeah, I was trying to keep it high level.
Right? Like you're trying to keep it high level. Those are, some big key building blocks. But I think for people that want to get into development and to do something along those lines, working with groups like Katie and, there are fee developers out there that they will be the developer for you. You can stay the visionary and you can kind of, identify opportunities, or you can plug and play into different parts of the process, but you pay them a fee to go through and take you through successfully the entire development process, right? Which is Absolutely. In a lot of ways, if you're inexperienced, a big way to mitigate risk and losses by having an experienced fee developer or development group that can go and do those things for you and navigate those things for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we never assume an ownership standpoint, because again, for our clients, it's their project, it's their, they have ownership, they have control through the whole process. This project we did invest in. We were asked to invest, and we do that for some projects and stuff like that. So do an equity, insertion. So, there's the fun thing about development, the fun thing about, I think, commercial real estate as well is the creativity you can bring into it.
That's like, nothing is cookie cutter, right? Like no deal, no development is ever the same.
No. Like, when you talk about like, oh my gosh, there's so many examples, right? So, but even like in that one there, we did a redevelopment agreement on that project too. And so not only is he getting rental income, but he's getting a check from the government every single week for the next 23 years.
That's amazing.
Whether he sells it or keeps it. That's the key.
That's the beauty, right? And we'll dive into some of these incentives and programs that are out there that people just don't know about that can drastically, like you said, change your capital stack, change your returns, change the whole process for you in a lot of ways. Going back to your first deal, because you kind of just skimmed over that real quickly as if it wasn't a big deal. For anybody to do a development deal with none of their own money and crush it, I think is something to, dig in on a little bit. If I'm
Yeah.
hearing you correctly, you said you had a relationship with Subway. That was your tenant, and you were looking at build to suit type of relationship for them. Is that correct?
Yeah, they were, it was interesting. I actually redid their layout so it got them in less square foot with more seating.
Okay.
So they said they were looking for this, like, I think it was like 1750 square feet. I'm like, I think I can get you into 1250 or 1500, reduce your costs, increase your profits. Are you interested? They're like, yeah. So we did that one. And then they basically said, we want these 3 other locations. And so we put them in 2 other locations that weren't ours, but we helped those owners lay out the space, design it.
Okay.
And so we plugged and played in different ways there. So it kind of starts like with each development project, it starts with like, what's the catalyst, right? Like, how do you step into the opportunity? And you can either create it where you look at a piece of land and you say, we need this here, and then go out and say, who do I know that knows those people?
Yep.
Right. Or do you start to build your own network? And for us, we were in the game of knowing, construction, and we did a lot of design, build, lease with an option to buy. Like, that was a big secret sauce for us. Because a lot of people want to step into it, but they don't know how, they don't know where, they don't have, I can't stand the excuse they don't have the money. Like that, like,
It's the worst.
challenge me all day long on that. Like, I'll go double down on that. Like, there's a way to do it.
Yep. Now, going back to that, because I think that's another thing that people go, well, sounds nice that you've got a relationship with Subway. How did you build that relationship with Subway? That didn't just magically, just fall into your lap. I'm sure you guys had some intention and purpose and some time invested into that. So just talk about how that came about and what that timeline looked like. And then obviously we know what came to fruition beyond that. But I think it's always important for people to understand, like, these relationships, these opportunities, it's the crock pot, right? Like, they take a little time. It's not just you put a quarter in and the microwave spits something out real fast.
Yeah. And I'm glad you say that, because that's actually one of the first lessons in our course is like, how do you build your network and who do you need in your network? So there's multiple phases of development, right? And so you need different people at different stages, but you need those like tier 1, tier 2 network people.
Mhm.
So trying to think back, like, I think back in Subway, it was one of my clients that I was listing the strip center, not the strip center, a shopping center. And we were listing one of their spaces, and they had called us for just inquiry of prices and stuff like that. And my question is always, I'm not your typical real estate agent. I'm not your typical anything, I think. But like, when they ask like, how many square feet are you looking for? What do you, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, stop. You're not going to get the good details, right? And so I was like, well, what are you looking for? Well, we have a metric, and he started telling me everything, right? Like, we're looking to expand 10 stores in the Tri-County area within the next 3 to 5 years. And like, what are your metrics? What cities are you looking for? And who are you working with on the other ones? And he literally said, would you like to have lunch next week? I said, I absolutely would like to have lunch next week. And that was like, after that, it was it.
Yep.
He goes, you started asking questions of how do you help me make my job easier? And he goes, why wouldn't I want to build a relationship with you? Right? Why wouldn't I want you to help me help me?
That's such a great point. Now, when you kind of put the capital stack together on that, how did you get into that opportunity? So you had the tenant in tow, right? And you knew what the opportunity was that they were looking for. Therefore, you could start to create some kind of financial model. Based on that financial model, then you were starting to kind of look at, how do I chop this up and structure the deal from a capital stack standpoint? And how did you get into that deal with no money? And what was kind of your sliver of the pie, or how did you make out on the back end of that?
Yeah. So I put my real estate commission in as my equity down. So that was the first thing. We negotiated a seller credit for some work that we were doing as sweat equity into it.
Okay.
And then my partner, I only had one partner in this deal, came in with the rest of the cash that the bank needed to close the deal. And we were 50-50.
Beautiful.
And
that's it, guys. I mean, so I just got off my mastermind call a couple hours earlier, and we were talking all about creative finance deals. And I was going over a couple of my creative finance deals. 3 of my commercial assets that I bought have been with none of my own money into them. And
love it.
they've been 7-figure exits. And, most now while it's not always common for most people, and it is challenging to find lucrative and juicy enough opportunities to where you can make that split structure and that capital stack work for everybody to where you don't have to bring money in. But at the end of the day, like you said, if you understand everybody's goals and there's a real opportunity there, there's a way to get the money across the table and still make it work for everybody. You just got to have that foresight. And also, I think just the open-mindedness to say, there's a way to make these puzzle pieces fit and everybody get what they're wanting. It doesn't work on every deal, but obviously in your deal, on my deal, and I've seen and experienced many other case studies of people doing it like that. It's possible, 100%.
Yeah. Well, and I love when you said that because, like we just talked about the Treskers deal. I mean, you talk to an investor, it's like 4.8%. Like, Katie, come on, right? But still, you're getting 0.25% at the time in the bank, right? You're still making more money, and you have no loan liability, right? Now, to back up on that deal that we just talked about, like I did split the loan liability 50-50 with my partner,
which is okay. So I've signed on a PG with no money in on the deal. I'm like, hey, if that's what I got to do to get my sliver of the pie, like I'll weigh those pros and cons and go, I'm willing to sign on some debt.
Oh yeah. And we've done that where that was the only thing we put, right? Like we get 50% of the deal and we're only taking all the liability. But when you talk about everybody getting part of the deal, like when you're talking with your mastermind, I think that's where it's really, how do you think outside the box? And one of the things that everybody's talking about, right, is the boomers, the retirement, the generational transitional wealth, and and the most trying thing is to do a deal with your family, right? Because like they're the ones that are the toughest clients. And so my parents they had built up, tons of buildings and they had a portfolio, but they were like a lot of boomers. Well, they've owned it forever, right? They don't take the 7-year valuation structure, but like they own it forever. So, their basis was super low. And so when my mom came to me and she's like, okay, we're ready to sell, right? And I'm like, okay. And I didn't want to buy it for arm's length transaction reasons. My parents would never get out of the deal. Like, that's a whole different story with a beer. But like, but I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, so what did we list it at? And she's a real estate agent, right? Like she's 43 plus years in the game, right? And she gives me this price. And I was like, and I said, Sue, like, I didn't even call her mom. I'm like, come on. And she walked me through it, right? And again, it's the seek to understand. Yep. She goes, like, we want to net this much. We know we're going to get killed with capital gains and this, so we got to list up here. And so I was like, so if I can structure a deal where you net this.
Yep. There's a lot of paths to get there, right?
Yeah. Are you good? And she's like, yeah, if you can, but like, come on. And I was like, challenge accepted, right? Like, tell me you can't do something. And 100%. So we structured a deal with a group of investors that we actually put together for this portfolio because we knew like this person wanted to get into commercial, this person wanted to get into commercial. I'm like, this is already cash flowing for you guys. Like you can come together. And they were just like, yeah. And so we went back and forth on the terms. They ended up she wanted I don't know, it was like north of $11 million because these were all smaller buildings, right? And we ended up and it was all cash flowing beautifully. I mean, way over like, I can't even remember the percentage on it because it didn't matter. They only came to the table with 1.5% down. And my parents got exactly what they want. And they get a $9,000 check a month for the next 10 years. Like,
it's so funny. We were talking about that today. One of the guys in the mastermind, he ended up buying an industrial warehouse building from a nonprofit organization in his town that did a sale leaseback. And he was gonna pay less and have to get traditional financing. And then I was like, dude, just give them a second option with seller financing, pay them more, but structure the terms of that in a way that is significantly better for you from a cash flow and a yield perspective, but it still helps them achieve their goals. And he's like, man, I didn't think about that. And then we got onto this long conversation of, I can't tell you how many deals I lost out probably early on in my career because I assumed what was best for them instead of just going, wait a second, like, what do you need again? Because once I was clear on what they needed and I didn't make assumptions around what I thought was going to work for them, and I looked at all the different ways to put, 2 or 3 menu items on there that they could choose from, knowing that we could still accomplish that goal with all 3 of these menu items. So many more deals started to convert in a higher way. So to your point, right, to his point, to my point is like, don't assume what is best for somebody. If you can really understand what the end goal is, there's always a model, there's always a math equation, there's always options when it comes to how you can creatively structure real estate deals to achieve that.
Yeah. The one trick my coach taught me early on is go into any conversation, showing, and only ask questions.
Yeah.
Any statement you want to make, figure out how to put it into a question and then shut up, right? And listen. And when I started doing that, like, people will tell you everything you need to know if you'll ask and shut up.
Yeah. That's so true.
I mean, and if they don't, it may take 2 questions, right? And like, come in, because they want to do a deal, right? I mean, obviously they're either listing their property or like the nonprofit sale back. Like, there's a pain point there. Like, what's the real pain point? If you can solve that, make your terms work, then like win. Everybody comes out. Yeah.
Which is always the goal, I think, when you're a real estate investor, if you want longevity in this industry, you want referrals, repeat business, opportunities, investors coming back to you, is you really do want to keep that the main priority, right? And, I think what, to your point, you said, which is, always staying in a state of curiosity and asking questions helps make you more purposeful and intentional about what value you can actually bring instead of assuming that. But it also gives you more clarity around how you can really solve problems and create those win-win structures. Because it's always the person who's talking the most instead of asking the questions that you're like, all right, we get it. Like, you're great, or this, or whatever, versus the person where I'm like, man, this person is really inquisitive. Like, I like that about them. I like, like, we as human beings like people being interested in us and trying to bring value to us. So I've just always, thought that was such a secret weapon. Like, the people who are the most curious, that ask the best questions, not only do they get the best answers, but it's like a likable quality that makes, when you're in kind of some of these high charged, negotiating environments and situations and a lot of money on the line, if you can just make yourself a smidge more likable, that could be what gets a deal done. That could be what gets an investor wiring over an extra $100K. That could be whatever, right? So I love that you brought that up, because I think it's such an important thing when it comes to negotiating and deal structuring, in real estate in general. Now, to give a high level overview just for people that are like, help me understand kind of the stepping stones of development, right? Like, from a raw piece of dirt to, hey, we've got a structure that a tenant can move into and, generate revenue from. What does that look like? I know there's a lot of nuances. I know your course and your community goes pretty deep dive and detailed into it, but maybe just some of those high level building blocks for people to understand what those are, to understand timeline around that. And oftentimes, I know a lot of concerns people have is like, there's a lot of money that has to go into development before you're going to see a structure. Maybe you can share some of those things from your perspective.
Yeah. So, really it starts with like, what do you want to do, right? What are you passionate about? What do you want to do? It goes back to that time, talent, treasure triangle kind of thing again, is there's so many ways to play in real estate, and there's so many ways, the different product types, there's different ways to go into it. So to really feel out like, what do you want to do? And then you start to look at like, it's like ideation and like, where do I go from like that to value, right? And is what you're saying. And so in our course, what we do is we really bring, and it was really hard for me to bring that back and create this structure that goes linearly through the whole process. And then we can niche out, which is why I wanted to put the community with the course, because I want people to be able to ask questions as they're going through their deals and say, well, Katie, what about this? I ran into that. Or how do I do this? Because that's, to me, the mentorship is where we all kind of just, we need the binky in essence, right? Like we didn't learn to ride our bike by ourselves. We didn't, learn how to play sport by yourself. We all had coaches and mentors along the way. And then we graduate and all of a sudden the world tells us, okay, now you're on your own, which is really bullshit because again, we need that whole handhold, like your mastermind, right? Like you're helping those people think through those processes. They're really smart people. I know they are, but it's that community, right? And so when you start to look at the project, it's like, what am I doing? Can I do what I want to do with the property as it sits right now? Like that's the first basic question, right? Do I have to go through rezoning? Do I have to go through this? Like, and I always look at that as like, what's my time frame to control the deal versus commit to the deal? And so, because I like to control, I don't like to commit. Like I committed to my husband,
right?
Yes, yeah. And with Treskers, we extended 3 times, and finally and it was a family estate. I mean, like it was the toughest deal like to put together.
Yep.
And she finally was like, Katie, like you got to close on this. And we actually had to take an interim loan from one of our investors to say, hey, do you want to come in before we're ready? We'll give you a bump up, to make it happen, just to make sure, because we had literally extended it 3 times, but we needed to because of everything we had to do for the building to get done. So when you look at that piece, is it ready to go? Is it zoned properly? Do you have entitlements? Do you have utilities? And then I look at, if you don't, what are the timeframes for each one of those, right? And
which is why controlling it is great, because you can work through that process before you actually take all the risk on of owning it, right?
Amen. Yeah, because the worst thing I get is when somebody comes to me, I was like, I'm ready to do a deal. I'm like, awesome. Like, what property do you want to buy? And they're like, I already have it. I'm like, okay. And then you find out like, okay, it's not zoned. And you're going to go to the city council with people with pitchforks, and because they don't want what you want, and now you have this property. I wasn't involved, but like you bought it and now you can't do what you want to do with it. And now you're trying to sell it to somebody else that probably wants to do something similar. You want to do it and they can't do it either, So I want people to be controlled. And I have, in our course, we have 20 contingencies that you should have in your LOI. Yep. And people are like, 20? I'm like, these are like the bare minimum you need to have in there. Like we really have a list of 50 that I check through everything, but 20 of these bears, because this is really what's going to tackle you before you get to that finish line, right? And so then you need to look at like, I always call it the minimum max. Like what's the minimum amount of money I need to put in to get this project going? And what's the maximum I'm going to need on the outside, right? And that's when you can start to say, okay, I might want to structure this, bring somebody in, if I'm not able to, front the money and kind of get that cash flowing. And then at what point do you get where now, okay, we've gone through contingencies. We know we're good with zoning. We know we're good with code. We know we're good with permits, all that stuff. Then to get like your structure together in terms of your costs, like what does that look like? And a lot of people, when you're doing developments, like having that network, I can't stress enough what you said, like build the network, massage it, work it, like start to build it. I increased my golf game because like I needed to golf with like a lot of the city guys, and they were keep going to all these like fundraisers. I'm like, screw it, I get the girl T advantage. Like I'm going to learn how to drive the crap out of the ball. And like I've done so many deals now on that. And
because of the golf course?
Golf course. Yeah. Golf course. Like, and now it's funny because now I'll go, like my banker will ask me to go, be like, hey, I got a foursome. I'm like, okay. And there was one guy, TJ, and he comes, I'd never met him before. And he goes, I got a handle of Tito's because I'm a Tito's and soda with 3 lines girl. And so he's like, I got a handle of Tito's and you're in my cart. And I'm like, oh shit. And he goes, I got questions galore. And we all 18 holes. It was nothing but like, how do I get this deal going? How do I do that? And I love it. And I always warn people, I talk faster when I have a couple drinks because my brain thinks faster. But we probably did 3 deals on 18 holes.
Amazing.
And like that he couldn't get past it. And so I always think that you're stepping away from that creative zone, to get your brain going and think outside the box. And there were simple stuff. Like I wasn't telling him anything he probably didn't already know. He just wasn't putting it together in a format that would make it happen. So, kind of your point is like your guy in your mastermind you mentioned, it's like he knows that's an option, right? It's just we get so laser focused in the deal, like I got to do it this way, I got to do it this way, that like we almost want to step back and and this is actually one thing I do now, is like, how do I kill this deal? Like now, if it's good and it's structured, how do I kill it?
Yeah, poke as many holes in it as possible.
Yes.
All the ways it can go to zero, right? Like if you can do that, then it gives you that much more confidence moving forward and taking on the risk. Because there are risks, right? There's risks that are in your control and there's risks that are completely out of your control. We've unfortunately seen that with a lot of developers, right? That just got crushed because of timing, or their cap stack was a little off, or they didn't poke as many holes in the deal. But we kind of back to the time frame and the process, right? You got your soft costs and taking you through all of the things you need to get a permit in hand to build this. And then once you got that, your permits and your construction costs and all the other things kind of figured out, financing, team, building it, talk a little bit about hard costs and, going vertical.
Yeah. So when I look at the deal, I put I'm a contingency girl. Like I'm like safety people. I'm a contingency girl. Like
tell me more about that, because I think that's so important. You said 20, 30, 50 contingencies, right? Like that's obviously from a lot of experience and a lot of and a lot of like lessons learned, right? Of like, man, we got to make sure we add that into the contract next time, because that put us under, pressure, or that kicked our butt. So like, what are some of the most important ones from your perspective on a contingency side that, if you're going to go down this path, like put these in there. It can't hurt.
It can't hurt. And it also, to me, it helps educate the seller, because sometimes that your shit, your timeline, and you're also educating them why nobody else has bought their property.
Yeah, totally.
So, and I say that, like, if you put it in the LOI, you can bypass the discussion with the other agent, which I'm a licensed agent, but not all agents are created equal, right? So you're 50-50 if you have it in a conversation, like, well, I need this time frame because I got to do this. Where if I say, hey, this is not zoned properly, I need to zone it this way. I need to make sure, because the other thing now is, like, one of the things we talk in the course is overlay districts, right? From a zoning standpoint, they can help or hurt you. They can add uses that you want that you don't have to go through rezoning, but they can also take it away. So you could be buying a property that's zoned properly, but it's in an overlay district and you can't do what you want to do. So it's that due diligence and going through it. So there's the zoning contingency, the permitting contingency, the economic incentive contingency, because I almost always have one, in at least one. And that's a process to get through, right? Is to get through it to the end. Financing contingency. If we have a board of investors, I put a board of review for my contingency for my investors. Like, if I put the whole project together and the board's like, we don't like the return, Katie, we can walk away. Like,
beautiful.
Because they're not going to sign on the loan document, right? Like, they're not going to sign if they can't get that return.
Yep.
So, and even investors,
What's a healthy timeline for those contingencies, you think, in general, that you guys like to give yourself? 90 days, 120, 6 months, a year?
Yes. So like, we like 6 months to 9 months if it's a light incentive. Now, it also depends how much your permit process is, and how much and how long. So like in Austin, like downtown, like, you're going to need a permit expediter. So you got to put that in your stack, which, like, we never needed that in the Midwest. Like, I just call, I'm not going to say his name because he'd be like, don't tell me. It's like, I'd call the guy at the city, my buddy, and be like, hey, I'm submitting this. Like, what do you need? And we'd have a permit in 4 to 6 weeks, right? Like, some cities, that's great. Some cities, you're 6 months for the permit.
Yeah.
And then it goes back to your cost structure. So if you don't know really the contingencies, and I have a spreadsheet that I work through, like, okay, if it's this contingency, it's that if then else statement. So it will calculate your numbers of due diligence from, like, if I submit my offer on this day, this is the fastest I can close.
Yeah.
And that brings into consideration, like, if I have to syndicate, if I have to bring investors in, my pitch deck, going to the bank, because you also have to remember, lots of times those banks, when you're putting together a development deal, you can get a pre-approval on your pie in the sky idea, but then you have to submit that packet to bank review. And if you're over a certain amount, you may have to go through the next loan review, right? So that could be 30 days just in that process. And if allowed, my dream situation is that, like, we have everything together. So when we close, like, I got a truck on the site the next day. So then when you look at, like, the contingency bucket on the financial stack, we have a contingency for financing, right? Like how much more money do we need? You have a contingency for timeline. You have a contingency for materials. You have a contingency for unknown. And that also helps structure that cost finance. And so we know when we head into that,
Right.
this is when we got to go.
I love that. So you guys are really thorough and diligent on that whole preliminary process up until the point of shovel ready, permit in hand, we're ready to rock, breaking ground. And then obviously depending on the scope of work and the size of the project, that will dictate, your kind of vertical timeline of going and getting vertical. But overall, what is your guys's minimum thresholds of return, and what return metrics are important to you guys and your investors?
That's an interesting question because it really depends. So I can't remember what it says. It's like you're either a deal state or a money state, right? Like, what are you looking for when you're offering? And there's some deals we go in that it's all about appreciation. We know we're not going to see a cash return paid out for 4 years, but then we're going to sell it for 175%.
Yeah.
Or we're going to see that this is it's got to all fit. So while we don't have that, we don't ever start a deal less than like a 10% cash on cash, because there's too many things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And that's like the bare minimum, right? We got to see that we're healthy there. But really it's a case by case basis because the bakery, nobody got paid out until they got bought out. Right. So it's that time frame. And that's where I think, especially if you're syndicating deals or if you're bringing anybody's money in, you have to disclose, like, what are your options? So for us, it's really a case by case basis because sometimes we want the tax return. We want the tax credits. We've done a lot of historical tax credit projects. So it's like, I'll take those instead of a return. Right?
Yeah. And that's the beauty is there's so many options out there. And oftentimes not everybody knows what those options are. What led you into the kind of uncovering of the incentive space with tax credits, with, whether it's local, city or regional or state grants, green, there's so many different things that are out there now from the federal, state, levels. Like, what led you into that space? What have you learned? What has been beneficial for you guys? What should people be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think it's a timely question, especially with the new administration. And I'm not going to get into politics, so whatever your political stance is, when Trump was in office last time, he threw out opportunity zones.
Yeah,
and I remember hearing there was a lot of teaching before it was finalized, and I'm like, I'm going to go learn about this. I'm going to dig in. And I remember going to this CDFA conference, and it was all EDC directors and CDCs and CDFIs. They're trying to learn how to put it in their communities, right? And I was, again, just asking questions and asking questions and asking questions. And by the end of the conference, I just had a following around me just listening to the questions, right? And it was because all of them were looking at it from a business or like a municipality standpoint. I'm looking at it from a business standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do I do it? And I think you're going to see, because I said, as soon as he gets in office, we're going to have some wild, wild west real estate stuff, like, hold on, right? And we did. Like, if you really understand the opportunity in opportunity zones, like, wow, it was insane.
Yep.
And so then it really started to look at, like, these are ways that government entities incentivize growth in areas that they want, right? So they basically, if they've done it right, they'll set it up like a silver platter, and they'll have a TIF district, they'll have an enterprise zone, they'll have a business development district, they'll have an SSA. If they have a historical district instead of registered buildings, that is another way too. And so then you have this like silver platter of incentives where now, like, you don't need any of your money in. Like, it helps it all go in, and it's all the project building upon itself to put it in. And they speak as if it's so complex. And that's what I want to teach. And that's why I teach our clients is, like, how do we dumb this down? Like, and my 14-year-old has been watching me create these courses and record stuff. And he's like, Mom, I want to learn. And I'm like, giddy up, let's go. Like, so we have a weekly meeting where we sit down, and I actually had just one of my clients pitch him whole life plans where he can put the money in, invest, and he goes, wait. And so now he's learning about arbitrage and this. And if you can get the concept down so basic, it's easy, but people like to complex it because the government puts a plan in there. And if you have the right plan for what they want, they'll help you understand it.
Mhm.
If you don't, they're not going to help you understand it because they don't want what you're bringing. And so, if you look at those areas in our community, like there's ways you can buy a property for $1. There's ways that you don't even have to buy a property, right? Like when you said stay curious, one of the things that came is from the Treskers deal, the city manager came to me and said, Katie, I have another problem. Could we talk about it? I'm like, absolutely. What do you got? And everybody has this in their town. Every single buddy has one in these towns. The vacant corner gas station, right? Like we drove at a road trip this summer and like my boys, it was like the padiddle game, right? Like, oh, there it is, there it is, there it is. So what we helped him structure is the deal because he's like, he won't get out dead center. He wants too much money for it. But like, I got to get this off my corner because like I have this beautiful row of restaurants coming down and everything's happening. And I was like, okay, I'll give you 5 options. He's like, excuse me? I'm like, I will look at this deal. I'll give you 5 options and then we'll figure out what we want to do. We had it under contract within 30 days. We had it redeveloped in a year. And the village didn't pay $1 for it out of their general obligation. And our client that went into it didn't pay any money out of their pocket. It all came from revenue from the development.
Amazing.
So win-win-win, right?
Yep.
I mean, and that's when those programs are used for us to do what we need to do to build our communities. So we need to learn how to leverage them so that we can put more of our money and our investments like to targeted need work. Because if we can say, hey, go into a project instead of doing an 80-20 loan on something, right? Put 20 equity in and 80. If I can put 5 in and I get, say, 65 in incentives, and now my loan's only 30%, like, isn't that a better deal?
Big win. And it kind of reminds me of the way I look at things are metaphorical board games and everything, right? Like when I sit down and have a chat with my 10-year-old daughter, like I'm playing a board game. Like I got to figure out how to play this game with her versus my 7-year-old is different versus my third is different. Same thing with commercial real estate to single family real estate, 2 different board games, right? But I think it's kind of like IRS. Board game, right? Like there's stuff in there that tells you how to play the game based on what you're trying to solve for and what you want to do that equals a win for you. Same thing on those grants, same thing on those tax credits, on certain incentive programs. Like those board games are out there. You just got to figure out where they are and go belly up and just get in and get a couple rounds in. And then once you do, right, you start to really see things slow down and understand how certain things within that board game, how those strategies apply to your, overall project or investment. So I love that you brought that up because I think a lot of people don't know about them or know where to find them. When you, if just to wrap up on this topic, where would you say people can learn more about the incentives that may be out there for them in their state, their city, on certain types of projects? Like, where can they do some research?
Yeah, so your local EDC is the Economic Development Council or Committee, is a great way. They'll list them out on there. I will self-plug and say our course teaches an intro level, and then we deep dive into examples of each one of them. But you can really start with your EDC to see where they're at. And then if you have a GIS map, a lot of times people use it to find like parcel numbers or like who owns a property.
Yeah.
There's also layers that will show you like where these incentive zones are. So you can go there and you can look at it. And actually, here's a big tip. If you want free property, you can go onto your GIS and type in, and you have to know the legal names of all your city entities. You can type in the city name or park district name, and you can find all the properties that they own. And so a lot of times with cities where they get properties back with that they don't pay their taxes or condemn or and they have these properties that they really don't want. You can go in, offer to buy them for $1 and rehab them, and they will give them to you because they want them back on the tax roll.
Yeah.
So GIS is a great way to find that. And then if you can tie it with some incentives too. CDFA is a great education from the structure standpoint. But I would say joining joining a course in community, joining a mastermind like yourselves, Like that is being around people that use it and know how to use it, because the creativity is in the application, right? So like I've probably not used a TIF the same way twice, like ever in any of my deals. And I always have them, right? And like there's different levels of incentives that you just kind of keep asking. And sometimes the best thing is to call your EDC or your city administrator or whoever handles those economic development in your community, and just either take them to lunch, go to a happy hour, go golfing with them, or, just ask them, hey, can I have an appointment with you for an hour? And say, I want to start developing in my city, my town, my community. What do we have to work with in terms of economic incentives? Ask them, do we have a TIF district? Do we have an enterprise zone? And start to ask those questions about like the exact incentive. And a lot of times, businesses will go and say, well, I asked them, like, what do they have? I said, what was the exact question you asked? Well, like, how do I get free money from the city? I'm like, well, they're going to say there is none, right? Like that's not the program, right? It's what are you doing? What programs do you have to inspire developers to come into your community and do it? Some communities here in Texas, like EDC is going to pay for your infrastructure. So you're doing like a neighborhood in a blighted area. You could say like, I want you to pay for all the water, sanitary. I mean, like you got to know what you can play with. So I feel like it's like the analogy for me is like, if you go to a job site, and you bring, a toolbox, but you really need like, a sledgehammer or a saw or, some other tool, you're not going in with the right tools. And so, same thing with the board game. Like if you don't know the right strategy, like I love playing Monopoly with my kids. Like now nobody in the family will play Monopoly with me because I do side deals. And so, cause I sit down with a notebook, but it's that, right? It's getting in the game. It's seeing how do other people use it? How do people do it? I've had people come in behind me and say, I want the deal Katie had. And like, they're like, well, that's a project specific. Like, no, I just want what she had, because they don't know how to structure it. Right. Yeah. And so, but if you know how to structure it, you're going to get people that want to engage with you because they also want to learn from you, right? They want to know, why did you do this? How did you put it together? And then they will reverse deal flow for you. Yeah. They will start to bring you deals like the city administrator did.
100%. Well, Katie, we have only scratched the surface. I know you and I could probably talk for a few more days, but I know many people are going to want to know more about you, your course, the content you put out online. Where's the best place for them to find you and engage with you?
It's a really long URL. It's katiekim.com, KATIE Kim.com. And on social media, it's thekatiekim.com. So
cool. Thanks for coming on the show, Katie. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.